Welcome back to the podcast where we continue to reimagine theological education together. Today, I want to take you somewhere. I want to take you to a continent that is arguably the most dynamic center of Christianity today, Africa. The church is exploding there. The Spirit is moving, and yet underneath that extraordinary growth, there is a quiet crisis that doesn't make many headlines today. A crisis of preparation, a crisis of formation, a crisis of pastoral training. That, if left unaddressed, could undermine everything else we're doing in church growth in Africa. My guest today has made it his life's work to go after that challenge head on, and Richmond is a pastor. He's a scholar. He's a founder of Pastoral Discipleship Network, PDN, an organization that has equipped thousands of pastoral leaders for church ministry across Africa. He knows this terrain, not just academically, but personally, and we're going to get into that conversation today. Richmond, thank you for joining me in this podcast. Thank you for being part of this conversation.
It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited where we're going with this.
Yeah, and again, thank you for being here. I am really excited about our conversation, where we're headed. So, Richmond, you've given basically your life's work has been centered on the topic I just introduced a moment ago, pastoral training across Africa. Let me just start out by just asking, what is the greatest challenge today in pastoral training across the continent that you serve on?
You know, Micah, that's such a great question. For me, it's the question that burdens me every day. I challenge pastors, I challenge evangelists, I challenge people that as we are clapping around and about the thousands of souls that are coming to Christ in droves. I mean, my church, New Life Church, just last year alone, in a space of 2 weeks, in an unreached place called Buyende, in eastern Uganda. So 1,046 souls come to Christ.
Wow.
In a week.
Wow. In one week in Uganda.
In Uganda.
That's remarkable. Yeah.
And as we were celebrating around this, the picture you painted came to me with such a heaviness that as we clap our hands around the thousands that are coming to faith, when we hear the other side of the story of how many pastors who are receiving these new souls are untrained, how many pastors don't know what to do with them, how many pastors themselves have not been discipled, have not been trained. That just elevates the need for pastoral training, discipleship training, and calling pastors back to the work of stewarding that harvest. And I think for me, having seen that, having lived my life as a person who was able to cross the line of faith and then stood alone for such a long time, many times did I want to go away from the church. Many times did I feel like going away. But by the grace of God, I stayed. And so, unfortunately, I saw many of my friends turn back. And so that's what really burdens me, even as I think about the great move of God that's happening in Africa.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, the part of the reality is that those 1,400 people that have now given their lives to Christ, they may be part of a church, or they may be even, some of them may even go off and start their own churches, and who's going to lead them? And that's the challenge, right? Is the rapid growth of the number of people that are coming to Christ in Africa, churches that are being birthed, and not having enough pastoral leaders to train them. Richmond, there are all sorts of numbers and data that have been thrown out there about the statistics on the pastoral training numbers in Africa, percentages, and all sorts of things along those lines. And I go there too. I'm in Africa every now and then, and I interact with leaders, and they try to tell me what percentages or number of pastors aren't trained. You have probably one of the most hands-on approaches to your ministry, and you interact with pastoral leaders all over Africa. How do you address the data in terms of how many pastors or percentages? Is there a number that you try to rely upon? Because I've heard all kinds of numbers and percentages, and where do you go with that kind of question?
So when you look at Africa, Africa is a massive country. And I use the word country because that's how people misunderstand it. They think of Africa as a country. They think of it as a village or one space. As a matter of fact, I remember coming to the States one time, and when I introduced myself as coming from Uganda, some guy's face lit up, and he came and said, "Hey, I have this friend from Nigeria. Might you know him?" And he pulled out his phone trying to show me. And instantly I knew I probably need to start teaching geography or to just help people understand how massive Africa is. So Africa is massive. So when you think about the data that's being used to describe the state of the church in Africa, sometimes that data is pulled out of a place that is highly churched. So from, let's say, East Africa, where in Uganda alone, 84% of the population say they're Christians. In Kenya, it will be a slightly shy number than that, but it's still ridiculously high. You go to Rwanda, it's the same story. Now you take one step up into Somalia, into Ethiopia, into Eritrea, Djibouti, then all of a sudden those numbers plunge. And then you go up to Egypt again, those numbers plunge even further. Then you go west of Egypt into Angola, Morocco, Libya. Those numbers again look differently. Now, when you go all the way to the south, those numbers again look different. And so oftentimes when presentations are made, because the person is speaking about Africa, they will use those numbers and have a big brush that this is the story of Africa. So I'm very careful. I want to be very clear when I'm stating data or pulling data from different studies. I want to make sure the source and the region is pointed out. So for Pastors Discipleship Network, we use 70%. And so 70% of pastors in this part of Sub-Saharan Africa have received no training. And when I say no training, I mean not only theological training is absent, but ministry training has also been missed.
Yeah.
And so that's a scary thought, Michael, to the idea that most of the pastors have not processed the scripture, they have not processed theology, they have not processed their journey intellectually. Most of the pastors have not processed their journey in terms of academically. How does this fit in everything that I believe? And so when you think about a situation like that, it's very, very scary. But with regard to numbers, we have landed on 70% because the work of Pastors Discipleship Network is headquartered in Uganda, but we operate in South Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Tanzania, in Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And so with that part of the world, it's very fair from the research that's coming out and the data to say it is true indeed that 70% of pastors in this place have not had any theological training.
That is so helpful because you're correct. It's hard to use a number or percentage and use that across all of Africa when Africa is so large and so diverse in so many ways. But I think it's very helpful for you within PDN and the work that you're doing to say we're recognizing in the places that we are working, we've come to decide that there's about 70% of the pastors have no training at all. And when you're saying no training, you're including any formal training, any any training at non-formal level. You're including you're saying no training whatsoever to prepare for leading a church or congregation. And is that what you're indicating as well?
Absolutely. So I'll say this. When we say that 70% have zero training, what that means is that these pastors probably were one of 1,000 that gave their lives to Christ. But then the community recognized
Right.
other gifts in them. They were probably charismatic.
Yes.
They probably held leadership positions in the community. They probably stand out in the way they pray, or their story is particularly outstanding. And they look around and say, hey, man, why don't you lead us? Why don't you pastor us? And if enough people agree, then who am I to say no? And so people step into the pastoral role completely because of the belief of the people. They have not engaged anything whatsoever to do with scripture or calling, or they have no framework. And isn't God gracious? Because some of those churches have survived.
Yeah. And God has been gracious. That's so true. And I love the way you're doing this, Richmond, in the sense that you are giving us a profile of some of these pastors. They might have just come to Christ themselves, is what I'm hearing, and they might have just been part of this. Of the 1,400 that recently came to Christ in Uganda, there may be one or two or three out of that group that people say, you are equipped for this. You are called to become a pastor. Maybe not equipped, but you are certainly somebody we can follow, and you could become a leader of a church. And all of a sudden they find themselves leading a congregation, but as you said, with zero training or preparation whatsoever. I've heard you also say that many pastors, and I think I'm quoting you here, many pastors are desperate for truth, but carry fear and anxiety. That to me is a dramatic statement that you have there. What's behind that, and what are they afraid of? What unpack that statement for us a little bit, if you can, Richmond?
There's a pastor called Micros in Siwamasi who said to me, the reason I was quick to hire an assistant is I wanted to quit because I considered the weight of carrying all these people to a place that I don't know. To be responsible for all these lives, I don't want to carry that.
Wow.
And so the real fear in his life, Michael, it was overwhelming him. On the outside, when people looked at him, they saw a confident man with a clear vision, taking them somewhere. A man who understood that in the African culture, it's a very common saying, nobody joins a bus until they know where the bus is going. And he's painted a picture of where the bus is going. But he himself doesn't know for sure that the bus is going there. And so to be able to take people in your bus to a destiny you do not know or you're not sure is quite scary. Remember that a lot of these pastors don't come from a vacuum. They come from with a set of beliefs. Most of them would be African traditionalists. They would be ancestral worshippers. They would come from a place where they believe in something. So the story of Africa is very akin to the Athens story in Acts 17, where Paul steps onto the scene and looks around, and these are not people who don't believe in gods. They do believe in gods. There's this God, and then there is this God, and then there's this God, and there's this to an unknown God. And this is where our people are coming from. So even the pastor, when we use the word pastor, I would hate for everybody in their mind to assume we're talking about a theologically grounded individual who is standing. That's not who I'm describing. I'm talking about a person who is practicing syncretism as a pastor. At one moment, he is reminding himself of this new faith he stepped into. But just the next moment, he's reminding himself of the power of the gods that he came from. So even as a
Wow.
pastor, if his wife gives birth to twins, he knows what rituals need to be done with twins.
Right.
If the date that his wife or relative who was close to him, if the date that that person passed away comes around, he knows they have to do last funeral rites as a pastor. And so he knows that, yes, I've accepted to become a Christian, but I cannot deny who I am. We call ourselves African traditionalists or people with the ancestral religious practice. And so the pastor who is standing, again, is very different from what you might imagine in the United States. Someone who is standing, someone who has theology, someone who has a choice on whether to speak the truth or to take the alternative route for whatever selfish gain. We're talking about that kind of individual. So when I describe pastors who are afraid, I'm describing people who are considering the weight of what they have accepted
Right.
to lead all these people. To where? That's the question. And so some people are so scared by the answer to that they say, you know what? Someone else come and take this. And so that's what I mean when I say pastors are afraid.
That is a distinct and unusual perspective, Richmond, one that I have really rarely heard from anyone describe it in that sense. But I could see now what you're suggesting, that these pastors, some of them that are still very young themselves, young in life and certainly young in their walk with the Lord, all of a sudden they are people that are leading the bus on a journey, and people are looking to them to lead. And so we use the language of stewardship, right? But they might not use that language, but all of a sudden they found themselves in this tremendous stewardship moment where God has given them people that are going to be following them, and yet they're still trying to figure it out themselves. They're trying to figure out, how do you blend this newfound faith with ancestral worship and other practices that I have here within my context? It's got to be a very challenging, complex, and anxiety-ridden environment for them sometimes, and that's remarkable. What do you do, and what do you say to those pastors, Richmond, when you're meeting them and some of them may describe this to you, maybe they don't, but they're going through it. What's your statement to them? How do you walk alongside of them to help them navigate this leadership position that they've been given with little preparation? How do you help them navigate that part of that newfound purpose and vision for life?
Well, thank you, Michael. Let me just add one more layer for context
Sure.
purposes. So Uganda, the country that I come from, the country that hosts Pastors Discipleship Network, is the world's second leading country with the youngest population.
Oh my goodness.
Over 70% of our population is below 30 years old. And 60% of that 70% is below 15 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And so
that is staggering. Wow.
when you think about our history, from 1979 to 1986, we had 4 major civil wars.
Right.
And many of our fathers were wiped out. And so to paint the context for our listeners is Uganda sees itself as one giant youth group. And so if you were to pull out a pastor among this population of youth, you're not just talking about a person who's accepted and assented to this gospel message they have received, but you're also talking to a person who has no theological training, no ministry training, and completely fatherless in many situations, both physically, socially, and spiritually. And so we have what we call self-led, guesswork, try and error. This is what's going on. And Michael, this is where I'm really burdened, that as we celebrate all the thousands that are coming to Christ, the anxiety that must hit our gut is what's happening to this. Who is leading this? Because John Maxwell once popularly said, everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yes. Yeah.
And wherever the leaders go, so go the people.
Amen.
And so when you think about that situation, you ask me, what do I say to these individuals? Well, Michael, the burden that I describe led to the birthing of Pastors Discipleship Network. And Pastors Discipleship Network has become a massive answer. And across the region, it is seen as an answer from the Lord to the silent and private cries of these men who must appear strong before the people. But behind the scenes, they're broken, they're crying, they're saying, I'm anxious to my bones and I need God's help. And so Pastors Discipleship Network has come as one who is converging voices and inviting pastors to a place that is safe. And so by design, it is an interdenominational ministry that has pulled some tools together. What we're saying to pastors is we're not promising events. We're not promising some tools. We're saying, hey, let's come back to the Lord who brought us out of this darkness into this light. He has a plan for us if we will only humble ourselves and learn. And you might recall, Michael, that in my earlier description, I said, oftentimes in Africa, the people who step up into the pastoral role are people who the popular thought around the community votes them as pastors. They're charismatic and they're all of this. And so you'll find some of them succeed without theological training and ministry training. They'll have the charisma, the voice, the ability to rally people. But yet, when we call them back, they will be probably 80% of them who'll say, oh, we need PDN right away. And then there will be those who've seen some success, who'll say, look, I've read scriptures such as, now that you have the Holy Spirit, you don't need to learn from any man. See what I have done on my own with the help of the Holy Spirit. Why do I need you? And so we have those elements on the fringes. But I can tell you, it's always a wonderful smile when I look at these young pastors and I say, hey, come with us on a 2-year journey. At the end of the 2 years, you're going to be exposed to these 8 core competencies. 1, you'll be exposed to becoming a pastor theologian. 2, you'll be exposed to becoming a pastor preacher. 3, you'll be exposed to becoming a pastor disciple maker. 4, you'll be exposed to becoming a pastor leader. 5, you'll be exposed to becoming a pastor apologist. 6, you'll be exposed to becoming a pastor entrepreneur with an emphasis on tent making and financial stewardship. And then lastly, you'll be exposed to becoming a pastor parent so that you begin leading your church by leading your home. And we emphasize there, the best gift you can ever give your church is loving your wife well. And that it's just been fascinating. Over the last decade and a half, Michael, we've seen over 15,500 pastors say yes to that call. And so that's where hope is rising across them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let me something else I've picked up on in our conversation here so far is, let me go back a little bit. And I want to go back to PDN here for a moment. But the other thing I picked up on in your statements here a few moments ago is that not only are these young pastors, many of them in Africa, up to 70% that are in the regions you work in, 70% are likely have never had any training. You use the word zero training. But also what I'm hearing is many of them, maybe all of them, have zero mentoring or zero models in their lives, whether it be from home or within this new church community that they're in, who do they have to follow? Who do they have to as models in their lives? Is that part of the complex challenge here that we're facing in these parts of Africa, Richmond? Is that what we're hearing from you as well?
In 2012, we did a research. We pulled pastors from the city. Then we pulled pastors from towns. Then we pulled pastors from the countryside. And we brought all of them at the Pastors Discipleship Network's campus. And so for about a week, we began to interview them about their journey. And we asked them two questions. Question number one was, describe the state that you're in right now. Come at that question from how you feel about where you are to the reality that you stand in that nobody else knows.
Right.
It was shocking to us, Michael, how many pastors said they feel lonely.
Yeah.
And they feel alone. And they distinguished those two things, being lonely and being alone. And they say that those realities could be found in them. Pastoring is lonely, but it also means you find yourself alone. Remember, Africa is, like I said earlier on, a very wide and scattered continent where you'd find people on the islands, people in the mountains, people in valleys, people on the plains, people in the Sahara. Pastors are spread so thin. So it's not the case of, hey, buddy, can we come and meet at this coffee house or at Starbucks where we can... No, that's very rarely the case. For some of our conferences that we organize, people have to get onto the boat. They have to come from one of the islands, get onto the boat at 5 a.m., cross the lake where the waters are choppy like hell, and then cross over, and then have to leave by 3 a.m. before the waters become really bad. So this is the kind of situation where pastors find themselves in. And so most of these pastors find themselves standing alone. Yeah. But I can tell you, Michael, what we are excited about as we look at the African story is the opportunity. These are young people, full of energy, full of faith. Many of these guys pray like crazy. As a matter of fact, I was talking to Christianity today, and I was saying Africa needs to begin to contribute heavily towards the global story being told, because when you talk about things such as prayer, you talk about things such as fasting, things such as courage to go into the unreached places. We are a go people. If God said it, we'll go. And so we are a people that are looking for a vision, looking for something we can believe in. And if the word of God is instructed to us in a way that grips our hearts and the clear vision is painted, and you unleash this formidable force that the Lord is building, what could happen to the world? What could happen? So for me, this is an opportunity. I could cry about the lack of theological training, and I could cry about the lack of ministry training, and I could cry about the fatherlessness, but look at what we have. A team, a massive group of young soldiers of the kingdom looking for a vision. And if we can cast that vision right and equip them right, what could happen?
And that's where your work through PDN comes in, because that's what, in part, what you're trying to do with these young pastors that are leading these congregations across Africa. Tell me, you were getting into it a moment ago as well, Richmond, but I interact with so many that have so many training programs, non-formal church-based training programs. Some seminaries have training programs for pastors, and there's a wide and large number of training programs that exist today for pastoral leaders, and many in the West, many in North America and in other parts are looking to Africa, and they're saying, well, how can we help? What's our role in some of this? And we can get to that a little bit later, but what I want our audience to hear is, what is it about PDN that is different? What is distinct about what you're doing? Because again, I see so many programs that are involved in pastoral leadership training in Africa. What is it about PDN that you think is especially distinct about what you're offering these young people that are leading churches across Africa?
Several things are very distinct about PDN. The first one is that all our products were birthed out of research. We didn't want to make assumptions. We didn't want to make decisions from boardrooms. We went to the people. We went to the pastors. We called them in. We asked them about their stories. And so in 2012, the research that I referenced earlier on, we were able to pull people in. And then from there, we answered, what are the most critical competencies an African pastor needs to lead a healthy, thriving church? And so that conversation led to our competency-based training that essentially has 8 books that are delivered to pastors through a very interactive model over a period of 2 years. So that's the first thing that's distinct. The second thing that is distinct is that Pastors Discipleship Network comes to pastors not as one promising an event and promising some tools. No, we are saying to pastors that look beyond us and see if you can see Christ. We don't want to introduce pastors to PDN. We introduce pastors to Christ because we want to offload a bit of this burden by stirring them to learn. There is only so much you can teach a pastor in 2 years. There will be so much they encounter that requires information that we haven't passed on to them. So our goal is to make them hungry for Christ because we know Christ is enough and he can help them on their way. So when you talk about PDN, we're not talking about an events-based ministry, even though we do events. We're not talking about some hero institution, even though we have been named one of the leading voices in East Africa calling pastors back to training. We're talking about an institution that is Christ-centered. The other thing about the way we're offering is we offer 2 types of accredited training. Pastors Discipleship Network, after the Rwanda incidents where President Kagame shut down 6,000 churches and required their pastors to have accredited training, we founded Cornerstone University that provides accredited training to pastors who qualify to get into university. And that is securing them and keeping their doors open in the face of a new era where the government is breathing down heavy on churches, requiring their pastors who get accredited training all see their doors closed. The other side of what we offer is non-formal training. But Michael, here's the beauty of Pastors Discipleship Network's training. We don't just offer non-formal training to pastors because, remember, non-formal training does not pass to keep church doors open. Even if you finish the 2 years with PDN, your doors are not guaranteed to be kept open unless the program that the pastor has studied has been certified by Reformer. So what is Reformer? Reformer is this entity based out of South Africa that has now gotten global reputation of evaluating non-formal training and then putting an accrediting stamp on it from a non-formal version. And so both programs that Pastors Discipleship Network offers guarantees that church doors will remain open in the face and an era where there's high chances of churches being shut down. So those are the few distinctions of PDN.
Yeah, you know, there's a few things there that I picked up on as you were sharing. One is that what I'm hearing from you, and I think our listeners have already heard it in your conversation with me so far, and the tone of our conversation and your passion to see these young people, young pastor leaders, be cared for. You want them to not only know, but you want them to be cared for, shepherded, And I think that's what you're doing. So pointing them to Christ on a regular basis, letting them know, because you're right, you're not going to be able to give them all the information they need. They're going to run across issues in their ministries that they might not be able to be prepared for right away. But if they are grounded in Christ and feel like they are shepherded by PDN, that gives them something that is distinct, I think, from some other training programs. And they feel like they're being cared for, mentored by you and others. And of course, the issue of that you're mentioning, you're referring to the issue in Africa and many countries nowadays, especially in Rwanda recently, where the government, for those of you that may not know, the governments in these parts of Africa are closing down churches, literally shutting them down, closing the services, everything else, because the pastors have not gone through some type of training that has been certified one way or another. And so what Cornerstone is doing, and you can go to PDN's website and see what Cornerstone University is, that's providing some accreditation for them, but also the other one is Reforma. And Reforma is a member of ISET. I know that group really well, and they've done a great job all across, not just Africa, but many parts of the world, helping to certify trainers through their outcomes that they have laid out. And you can go to the webpage that will give you a link for that as well to Reformer and see what that's all about as well. So those are two great things that we're seeing there in Africa develop. Let's go back to PDN as well for a moment, Richmond, because some of my listeners may have heard me say in other episodes that one of the things I'm concerned about is that again, there's a lot of training programs out there. I believe that we don't lack content any longer. I believe there's a lot of programs out there that are available to train pastoral leaders. My concern sometimes is that I'm not sure that content is translating into transformational impact that can be measured maybe, or at least observed over time. I was with a training program in another country in Africa, I won't mention where, and they had been doing training programs for 12 years. And one of the things they said to me was, after 12 years, we're going back and looking at the people that we trained, and we're not sure if they even know how to share the gospel effectively, let alone lead a congregation. So here's my question, because I think for those that are watching and listening, that's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make progress in all of this, right? Not just deliver more training and caring for pastors as you're doing, but how is it that you're going about to understand the effectiveness or the impact of your training materials and programs in Africa? How do you measure impact is my question.
Oftentimes when we approach training, there's a massive temptation to copy and paste.
Yes.
And I had this very temptation at the beginning of the ministry. So I did my first undergraduate work in Uganda. I later on did my master's degree from Moody Bible Institute in Chicago.
Right.
I did my PhD work from Lancaster Bible College in Pennsylvania, which means I was exposed to a lot of Western thought, a lot of Western literature, a lot of Western learning and models. And when I came to Uganda, I gathered people and I said to them, pastors, listen, these are the answers to the questions you've been asking. These are the ways to do it. I have a good friend in Chicago who does ministry like this. I have another good friend in Pennsylvania who's nailed it this way. And the pastors were looking at me, and you can see on their faces, that's so good for them.
Yeah, good for them. Exactly. Yeah.
That just won't happen here. And it took me a while, but then I was just so dissatisfied with the results. I was like, what's not registering? And then it became clear to me. Have we investigated how African pastors want to learn? Have we investigated the type of content and the format of the content that registers? Have we gone beyond content to understand that some things are caught and not taught?
Yes. Okay.
And I began to really appreciate in the highest terms the work of Jen Veller, who's written a lot on flipped classrooms. She's written a lot on taking learning to task. She's written a lot on adult education. I began to understand that the first job of an instructor, of an institution of instruction, is to learn the learners. Who are they?
Right. Right.
What do they appreciate? What captures their curiosity? What forces them into a space where they want to live? And that's where we began to see some breakthrough. We began to flip our conferences. It used to be that we had a strong lecture format, and then we began bringing tables into the room. And then all of a sudden, we began to choose storytelling. All of a sudden, we began to use case studies over just some big theological book on this.
Yeah.
We began to use case
sure.
studies, and we began to unpack that. And what was fascinating for me is to see pastors begin to be willing to sign our covenant. So we ended up coming up in 2015 with what we call the PDN covenant, because we understood that accountability was extremely critical in the African context. And even though someone was willing and they appended their signature to something, we realized that willingness alone didn't yield the results. Knowing alone was
Right.
of transformation. And so we talked about how can we dramatize transformation over information. And so all these things began to shape our model. So when you come to our conferences, you will see and sense that we're asking ourselves, how can we make it fun for the African pastor to come to an African pastors conference? And over the years, the last 15 years, by the grace of God, we've been able to nail this. So that right now, there's one pastor called Mitchell who said to me, he said, Richmond, if there is another conference happening in the city, and I know that the PDN conference is coming up, you know which conference I'm going to be a part of. I'm coming to PDN because I know that there, it's not just checking off my attendance. It is actually engaging. And so, there's much to say there, Michael, but we've learned over the years, we've failed a lot, but we've also now begun to see some success, not in terms of events. Once again, let me emphasize, we do not consider ourselves successful because we held 24 pastors' conferences and all of them were filled. That's not success to us. Success to us begins when the pastor reaches his church.
That's amazing. That's great. And that's, and I'm with you there completely, Richmond, in the sense that, there are so many that are out there doing pastors' conferences or pastors' events, and then they might say, well, we just trained 1,000 pastors over the course of a weekend. I'm not sure how effective that is. And so we're talking about with what you're describing, it's a whole different level. This is not just simply an event. It is walking with these people, it is walking with these young pastors, making them feel as though, gosh, we're not in this alone anymore, right? I mean, you talked about pastors feeling like they're alone. You're helping them to go beyond all that and know that they're not alone, and giving them the tools to walk in their journey faithfully as they do so. One of the things I wanted to ask you about as well is this, and those of you that have watched some of my other episodes, there's an episode that I have that talks about how to define theological education. And I define theological education in a very broad and almost neutral sense, so to speak, that includes formal, non-formal, and informal types of programs. But I wanted to ask this question because some of those that are watching this episode might be more in the formal spaces of training. Maybe they're leading Bible colleges and seminaries across Africa and other parts of the world. What is the role, Richmond? And you've been at this for a while now, and you've interacted. You've been formally trained yourself. I mean, you were trained at Moody and Lancaster. You got a PhD and so on. So, what is the role of formal theological education, Bible colleges and seminaries across Africa? What is their role in helping to prepare pastoral leaders today in Africa, based upon what your understanding is?
Africa is the hub of cults. The variety of expressions,
Yeah.
not just outside the Christian theology expression, beyond that, and then within the Christian space. It is shocking and staggering just
Yeah.
how many expressions of thought and belief systems you can find in just one small area in Africa. And under a situation like that, there is the kind of training, which would say training in ministry and training in basic foundational theology, that won't cut it. Because some of these questions are deep and they require thought and they require defense and they require clarity. And so one of the roles I would say, number one, is to strengthen the apologetic mind of the African pastor. And not necessarily apology from winning argument. Sometimes apologetics
Yes.
is seen as just a space of battle and contention. That's not the interest there. It's discipleship. It's helping people follow the master and follow the way and follow the truth. It's helping people discern between what's false and what's true, and where necessary, step into the space where you've got to push back against contending thoughts or beliefs. And so I think theological education can play a key role in the African space of going beyond just what Paul would consider a foundational teaching into the space where the African mind can now argue. But I'll say to you that one of the things that's exciting us in the African church is the advent of the time when the African missionary and the African disciple is now carrying a vision that's beyond their local community, the vision for the world. We're excited that Africa, which was once the mission field, is quickly becoming the mission force. But the implication of this idea of the mission force is the African soul and the African disciple is extending beyond the boundaries of their confines into the world. Now, the world has exalted logic, it's exalted reason, it's exalted thought and critical thinking. And if the African disciple is going to cross in the name of Christ, what results can be expected? What results can be expected? And so for us, we're really excited about the role of theological education in raising these people who've been fashioned into the halls of thought, the halls of critical thinking, halls of engagement, where they wrestle with truth, such that when they come out, they're formed and can be trusted to engage, both in their life, in their story, and all of that. And then the other thing that I would say is this, that the government has begun interacting very closely with the church. And it used to be that the government's posture towards the church was, don't bother me, I won't bother you. Mind your business, I'll mind my business. That's not the case anymore. The government is now releasing bills, releasing provisions within the law. And there must be African sons and daughters who've been raised through seminary, who's been raised through theological education, that can reason with government and reason with society from the scriptures and from their own source of truth, and make strong cases for the church. Without such, the church is just going to be oppressed over and over.
Amen.
And I could go on and on, but I can see
that's
the
good.
pillar of theological education is undeniably foundational to the strength of the church.
That's great. Great. You know, I was recently I was in Ethiopia for ISET's Regional Association, ACTI, had their General Assembly, and they were celebrating their 50th year anniversary. And I was there for a week, and I shared and I spoke and did a few things. But one of the things I enjoyed the most, it goes back to what you're just indicating right now, Richmond, is that I found, and I came back, I told so many people about this, there is incredible scholarship and local theologizing, local development of reflection that is based upon Africa by Africans, and it's developing at a large scale now. And you have other ministries that are also connected to ISET, like Langham and others, and scholar leaders that have invested in the formal sector, the Bible colleges and seminaries across Africa, and I am seeing some of the fruit of that, my friend. I'm seeing the people that are writing and reflecting and thinking about their context, the African context, and how is it that the Bible colleges and seminaries that are there in Africa, how can they contribute not only to the church but to culture and society, right? By sound theological reflection. So I am with you with everything you're saying, and it's an exciting time to see that in Africa. Some of this, some of the fruit that is being realized across the continent for the church there. Also, Richmond, I know that one of the things that I find most compelling about your story is some of your own background and some of your own upbringing and so on. And I know that you were raised in Uganda. You grew up in a slum there in Uganda. Your father died at a very early age, and you were a Compassion International young child that has led you to do remarkable things. And I love your story, brother. I really do. I love talking with you because I see where God has brought you from to where you are now, and just the studies that you've done here in the U.S. and now the leadership that you have across Africa as well. How do you? Let me ask you this question, Richmond. Kind of more of a personal question, I guess, maybe, but how is it that your background, your upbringing, your reflections about life and early ministry and all of that, how has that shaped the way you think about PDN and how you think about the church in Africa, how you think about pastoral, all of that? Give us a little bit of an insight about how your background has shaped what you're doing now today in Africa for pastoral training.
I am the least likely person the Lord would choose to do this work. And I'm constantly amazed at God's grace, how He looks around for the least likely, the most disqualified, and He chooses to use such a person, because such is my story. My father was murdered when I was 8. I spent time on the street, lost all hope. Through Compassion International, I found my way back into the church. I ended up being supported through school by a stranger who believed in God. And I look at my story and I am blown away that for all the times I knew that I was going to lose my life, for all the times that I slept on the side of the road, I did realize the behind the scenes formation that was happening. Michael, suffering has a way, it strengthens the soul. And anyone facing pain has one of two choices to make. One, they can let the pain destroy them utterly. Two, they can become stronger from that pain.
Yeah.
Looking at what I'm doing right now, Michael, I found myself in Karamoja, where there's no bathroom, there is no bed, as you would understand, bed. And I'm fine because somehow I was strengthened for that work through my time on the street. I've been in a place where I have been threatened. And I'm like, I'm used to this. I know what this sounds like and feels like. I know.
You've been there. You've been there before.
I've been there.
Right.
And so James is one of my favorite books in the Bible. He's counted all joy, my brothers, when you undergo various trials and temptation. I'm excited about that. And so the way I faced pain and suffering and loss and rejection now is, what good might come out of this? Why do I need this? Why does God see that I need this for tomorrow? And that has really shaped the way I've approached ministry, it's given me a high level of compassion. I challenge pastors to be brothers. And what that means for me is that look beyond yourself. Move away from the selfish, probably mostly Western, I think, ideology of individualism, and really embrace Ubuntu, that I am because you are, and you are because I am. I cannot consider myself a successful pastor when the pastor down the street is struggling. And so call on your brother, take on him. And if he needs some bench work, go bring 5 of your people, best carpenters, make benches for your brother. Embrace Ubuntu. And that has allowed me to, I think, posture myself before pastors so that the pastors in Africa look right through me and they say, this man has no agenda except he loves us and he loves Christ. And so those are some of the benefits I have gotten from my background of a lot of pain and struggle.
Yeah. And Richmond, as I'm listening to you and watching you here, I'm thinking that may be part of the secret sauce to PDN right there. It's just that people see you and others that are working on your team, and they know you're the real deal. You are authentic. You're transparent. You come from a background where nothing phases you anymore because you know that Christ has it all in his hands, and you are trusting in him for everything. And you're also one who is helping to motivate people because of where you've come from, my friend, and your background, and just from where you are to where you were to where you are is only by the grace of God in your life and the power of God in your life through many others that have poured into you. And you're just doing the same thing now with these pastors. You're helping them to understand you're not alone. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to equip you, and I'm going to motivate you to go and share it with others. So, Richmond, I just thank you for what you are and who you are and what you're doing. It's remarkable. And I was getting ready for this interview, and I thought, I can't wait to talk to Richmond, because every time I talk with you, I walk away with a smile on my face, no matter what. So thank you for that. I wanted to cover a few more points. And one is that, and going back to PDN for a moment, is PDN has an intentional effort to come alongside pastors' wives that are in ministry with the pastors as well, spouses. And that to me is also perhaps something that is, it's not unique, so to speak, but it's a distinct part of what you're doing, perhaps. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions here. One is, why do you do that? Why do you invest in the pastors' wives? And then kind of second part to that question is, what role do you see women serving today to strengthen the church in Africa?
Again, it was towards the end of 2012 that a lady named Rose Mugabe, who was a pastor's wife, walked into my office. And she said, "Thank you for what you're doing for the pastors, but we think you're missing a very important part of ministry." And I said, "What was that?" And she said, "The pastor's wife." And she said, "You're burdened for the pastor. You see the pastor struggling. You see him carrying a weight. Who carries this weight with him? Who struggles with this loneliness? Who is there looking at the pastor's kids and completely unsure of what to do? But who does not have a place that is safe where they could go and tell their story to people who would understand their journey?" And so that's who we are. We are pastors' wives. Across the entire country, there is not a place I can go to be vulnerable. Because if I share one thing that I'm struggling with, that has an effect on the church. It can impact the name, the health, the reputation, not just of the church, but my husband as well. And then what is my role? how am I to see myself? What am I to do with my gifts? And so these questions became very pertinent. I said, hey, I'm not a pastor's wife. I wouldn't know what to do to create such a program. I said, hey, I tell you what, if you will go and create a concept paper on what such an effort would look like, I would bring it to my board and we'll see what would happen. Long story short, Dr. Rose Mugabe, who did her PhD work from Fuller University out of California, went and wrote this paper, came to us. Needless to say, the senior management team said, we don't know a better person for this job than you to help us think and write this. So since 2013, after she presented it in 2012, we've been building this effort and learning. We like to see ourselves as learners. While we trust boardroom decisions, we want a bottom-up approach where we come to the pastors, listen to their story, come away with the kind of decisions and programs that they would own. And that is how we ended up building this pastors' spouses program. It's ended up being probably one of the most popular of our programs. I mean, it's amazing how these pastors will gather on our campus in Kampala City. And the Lord has blessed us with a 30-acre campus, which has various spots. Some of them are for prayer. Some of them are for people gathering. Some of them are for tents. Some of them are for trainings. And these pastors' wives will gather one-on-ones and in sessions, and they will have their time. And again, what an answer from God to these pastors. And you asked also about how do we see their role? And I must say that where we come from is that we see pastors' spouses as gifted individuals. And we see them as able to contribute to the pastor's ministry. We see them as carrying the primary role of making sure that home is healthy. And so we also see them as those who can help contribute in the tent making for the case of sustaining home. Because again, many pastors in Africa have no contract with their churches. They have no promised salary from their churches. And so we say, as we train pastors in tent making, their spouses must attend so they can understand what giftings and what resources could there be in their home that could be used to raise funds. And so the way we look at the pastor's role, we say there is, in most pastors' home, there is the ministry question. We encourage pastors' wives that if you feel called to it, lead women in your churches. Lead a group of mentoring the young girls within your church. Find yourself in that space. Again, underline, if you feel called to it. But if you want to stay home, do stay home. That's number one. Number two is the question of tent making, which is the financial question. So there is the ministry question, then the financial question. And then those two help answer the identity question. And then beyond that, it is the case of, as the pastor's wife, how am I able to support my husband in their expression of work? And so there we come into lean into theology, lean into studying ministry, lean into finding the history of the church, such that when your husband is preparing this work, you can soundboard intellectually and theologically with him. And so in our package for pastors' spouses, it's not just topics of an identity and ministry. We actually take pastors' spouses through foundational theology, everything from Christology, patrology, pneumatology, all the way down, such that they come from a place of, man, I am a great partner and supporter of my husband, and they've loved it.
That's great. That's great. And do you see some of these women spouses also, because of the training that you've been providing to them, they're also then taking on some leadership roles within the church, would you say?
Yes, leadership roles are, we leave that to the permission of their various denominations. And so for us, we work with close to 25 denominations now. And we find and respect the various expressions and positions of various denominations. Now, I come from an expression where the role of the female or the wife or the woman will not be a pastoral role. But that's where I come from. But like we said, we want to make sure that everyone is secure and given the tools to explore the scriptures for themselves. Then we say to them, go back to your denominations and please submit or subject yourself to where you come from.
Good. Yeah, because there may be some denominations that are also part of your network of trainees and so on, that or in their denominations they may have some women that are serving in leadership, and you're leaving it up to them to decide, make those decisions and decide how to apply that. So is what I'm hearing. Let me move to another question, then we'll be closing here in a moment. You know, this podcast is going to be viewed by people that are maybe in Africa, but a good number of them may be outside of Africa, and so as they view this, and they're looking at Africa, and of course, you know, Richmond, as I mentioned at the beginning here, Africa is a place where people are turning a lot of attention to because of what's happening there in the church, and you know that. But what is one assumption about the African church that most outside of Africa just don't quite get or understand, or maybe even they're getting it wrong? What are some of the perspectives? And you travel a lot. You're in and out of Africa. You interact with people from the West and Europe and other places and so on. But what are some of the things you hear that are just simply incorrect or misplaced or whatever about the African church today in your context?
The first one would be the role of the African church in the global conversation of the global church. That is, I have found in some places, completely misunderstood. And that is, the assumptions made around that are completely misinformed, uninformed, and just outright backward, I think, in my opinion. They have not been exposed to the level of thought, the level of critical thinking, the level of giftedness that is brewing on the African continent. And so I do think that the sooner pastors might ask themselves, what could the African church teach me? What contribution would the African church bring? What is coming out of there that might be of interest? Let me just color this point a little bit more. So I was in the Netherlands about 3 years ago, and I made a case for the African story. And as people were listening to this expression, to the giftedness, and I was very vulnerable, and I said to them, this is where we are weak as the African church. But my goodness, are we strong in these areas? There's so much so that it was, I don't know why I was even shocked, but the pastors from the Netherlands came to me and said, in the areas that you are weak, we feel strong in those areas. And in the areas that we are completely weak and even beginning to second guess our thought, our faith, and all of that, you are strong. And so out of there came the event that recently happened at Pastors Discipleship Network hardly 3 weeks ago, when 15 lead network pastors from the Netherlands came to Africa, not to teach, but to sit down and to be instructed. Michael,
Richmond, that is so. Pastoral leaders in the Netherlands are going to Africa to learn how to go back and be better pastors.
Absolutely.
My goodness.
I mean,
so good.
I just sat there. I said, I know that in the Lausanne Congress of 2010 in South Africa, it was hinted that the center of gravity of the Christian faith is moving to the global south, and that Africa would carry a significant part of the future conversation regarding the church. I just did not know that in my lifetime I would see this happen. So I think that is probably
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just saying that is one of the most significant assumptions or misunderstanding when people are engaging globally around the church conversation. And the pastors that are catching that quickly are beginning to realize, oh my goodness, there is something that is beautiful that's going on, and I don't want to stand on the sidelines.
Great. And you're not, Richmond. You are not on the sidelines at all. That's why I love talking with you. Hey, listen, as we begin to close, I'd like for you to, in one sentence, if you could, or maybe a couple of sentences. I know it's going to be hard in one sentence, but the theme for this podcast is how can we begin to reimagine theological education globally for the sake of God's people being on mission for His mission, right? And so as you think about that, and as based upon our conversation and everything else we have been talking about today, what would you say to theological education leaders that are watching this in terms of what would be your one sentence challenge call to them in thinking about how they could begin to reimagine theological education? And I use theological education in a very broad sense, right? So what would you want to say to them, Richmond?
The church in Africa is growing faster than the leaders are being formed. We have never been at this time in history when there is such urgency for theological training. And not just for now, but theological training for tomorrow. And so, in all the opportunities and gifts and resources and abilities that the Lord has given you, it would serve the global church for Africa to be included in your display as well as utility of the giftings God has given you. I would say to every theologian, train an African theologian. I'd say to every minister, train an African minister. Because in not long from now, the African minister will be raising the disciples that are going to take the gospel to the ends of the earth.
Amen. Amen. Richmond, brother, thank you so much for this time. Thank you. I know it's late on your hour of the day. Thank you for being part of this conversation. This conversation not only matters in Africa, it matters around the world. And what you're shared with us is vital for others that are watching and listening to this. So we just thank the Lord for you. Thank you for what the Lord has done in your life, what He's doing through PDN, and for your continued faithful work in that. And so thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. And friends, as you're watching this podcast, if the Lord has stirred something in you with this conversation and you want to continue to learn what's happening in global theological education, please feel free to subscribe so you could be in tune with what other episodes might be coming out from this podcast. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us today as we continue together to try to reimagine theological education for the church in its mission.